Okay, so today's lesson is going to be about Pearson square and balancing feed rations. So we've been talking about animal digestion. We've gone over some different types of feedstuffs, and today we're going to talk about balancing those feedstuffs so that when livestock come into our facilities, we're making sure that they are receiving an adequate amount of nutrients and viable proteins in their diet. Okay, so why do we use the Pearson square? It's a useful tool for simplifying balancing of rations. It shows the proportions or percentages of two feeds to be mixed together to give a percentage of the needed nutrients. So in this case, we're going to look at an example and we're going to walk through some steps of how does this look on paper, and then you're going to do some examples to be able to kind of practice what we've learned here today. So the Pearson square method we're actually going to use to balance out two different feedstuffs and make sure that we get a correct crude protein percentage for the livestock that we're feeding. So in this example, we have 2,000 pounds of feed is needed to feed 100-pound growing hog. So we're trying to make sure that this hog has the proper nutrients needed. It tells you that the feeding standard here, that a growing hog needs 18% crude protein, okay, and that will become important later. Corn and soybean meal are the two feedstuffs that we're selecting to use here. Two of the more common feedstuffs that we talk about when feeding livestock. And so for this example here, we're going to use corn and soybean meal. So this talks about looking at a feed composition table. We're not going to look at those. All of our examples will have your crude protein percentages already written out. But here they tell you that corn has 8.9% crude protein and soybean meal has 44.4% of crude protein. And so, like I said, we're not going to have to look at feed composition tables right now. Your examples that you will look at will have a different type of, they will give you the crude protein percentages of each of the items for which you will be using Pearson square already. So now we're going to start with this question: and how much corn and soybean meal do we need to mix together for 2,000 pounds of feed? And so this is where Pearson square is going to come into effect, because we're going to be able to, at the end of this, tell how many pounds of soybean meal and how many pounds of corn we need to mix together to get that 18% crude protein desired for a growing hog here. So step one, don't worry about the 1 to 2 inch box. That's a little too precise for me. What I want you to know is that we're just going to draw a box with diagonal lines across it. So here's our box, and we are now going to draw our arrow from one corner to the other, and the same concept here as well. So notice we have the two lines going across the box. Those will come into play later. So that is step one, is to draw your box and place those diagonal lines across it. Okay, so here we still have our box with our diagonal lines, but they're separated a little bit, and that's for a particular reason, because now we're going to write the percentage of crude protein needed by the animal in the center of the square where the diagonal lines cross. And if you refer back to a couple slides earlier, you will note that in this case we needed an 18% final crude protein percentage to feed our growing hog here. So we're going to go ahead and write that in the center. So now that we've written that in the center, we need to now think about our difference in finding each of those individual values. And so now we're going to identify the feeds that we've used, and we're going to place the percentage of crude protein in each corner. So for example, corn, as we stated earlier, was 8.9% crude protein, so we're going to put that in the upper left-hand corner. And soybean meal, or SBM, was 44.4% crude protein. So we're going to put that in the bottom left-hand corner. Okay, so that is step 3, is just writing those crude protein percentages in each corner, along with that 18% in the center. So now we're going to track the smaller of the numbers from the larger of the numbers, and this involves crude protein needed by the animal and what is provided by each of the feeds. We're going to write those in the opposite corner. So if you remember, corn was 8.9% and soybean meal was 44.4%. And as we go through some of our examples, this will become a little bit clearer, but what we actually did was we took, to get this number down here, this 9.1, is we actually took the 18% and we subtracted it from the 8.9%. So 18 minus 8.9 gave us this number down here, this 9.1%, or 9.1 parts, Okay, and since this number is actually smaller than this number, and if you read step 4, it states that we need to subtract the smaller of the numbers from the larger. So since 44.4% is larger than 18, we're actually going to take 44.4, we're going to subtract 18, and that gives us our final down here, or up here in this upper right hand corner, of 26.4. Okay, now these lines going across here are just to show that this then correlates to the parts of corn. And like I said, this will become a lot more clear when we talk about actual problems that you're going to be doing. But this corn is going to transfer across, and so if we follow the lines, this is how we should be doing it. So 26.4 parts of corn are up here in this corner, and we got that number by taking the 44 minus the 18, and that goes up there. The corn that we see here translates over. So that is step 4, is subtraction. So now we're going to take those parts that we just found back here, this 26.4 and this 9.1, and we're going to add them together. And we are going to find that step 5 is the numbers in the two right-hand corner are parts of the two feed ingredients that we need, and we need to find a total part. So 26.4 plus 9.1 gives us a 35.5 total parts for this ration. Okay, and simply that was just adding those two numbers on the right hand of the square directly down. Okay, so now we see that this is what it should look like on your paper when we're doing this, and when you start practicing, this is what your paper should look like. Now what we're actually going to do in this step is we're going to find out the percentage needed for each of these. And so this 26.4, that was our total parts that we just figured out, and we're going to divide that by our total parts of the whole thing, which was the 26.4 and the 9.1 added together. We're going to do that for each of these numbers. Okay, and that tells you right there that, you need to find the percentage, and basically what you're doing is you're finding a percentage of the total parts that each of those represent. So for example, this was corn. So 26.4 divided by 35.5 equals 0.744. If we multiply that by 100, we get 74.4% of this 2,000 pounds is going to be corn. And same thing with the soybean meal. We will find out that it is 25.6% soybean meal of the total 2,000 pounds that we need. Okay, so now this just kind of walks through some of those steps right here. So this is what your paper should look like as you're moving through. The amount of each feed ingredient for a large batch of feed is determined by multiplying the percentage of each by the total amount desired. So in this case, 2,000 pounds is also equal to 1 ton. So 0.774 is our percentage of corn. of the total. So we're going to take that 2,000 times 0.744, and that would equal 1,488 pounds of corn out of 2,000 to make sure that we get the right crude protein percentage that is desired. Same thing here, taking that 25.6%, turning it into a decimal, multiplying that by 2,000, which will give us 512 pounds of soybean meal. Okay, so in a 2,000 pound ration, if we have 1,488 pounds of corn and 512 pounds of soybean meal, this should be equal to an 18% crude protein in 2,000 pounds. Okay, and that is the end of the slideshow. Go ahead and transition to the next video where we actually walk through a couple of the problems that we have for you to do.